What's up, guys? This is Pete, the Carrot Man Clark, and I am here with my friend and student Jake. A very long-term student, actually, maybe one of the longest coach-student relationships I've ever managed to keep together. How's it going, Jake?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering if you're my most long-term poker relationship, coach to student, or not at the moment. Maybe.
Wow, that's quite an honor. Yeah, I think this goes back to 2016.
Yeah, something like that. That's crazy. Yeah, you must be.
Yeah, on and off. It's been a while.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to get you on, man, 'cause there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about. So just for anyone who doesn't know Jake, I mean, which is probably most people, given you're not like massively famous, but you're predominantly a live player,
Yeah.
playing online, obviously, like everyone else in the world is just now, in November 2020, pre-vaccine, post-lockdown. You guys know the gist. We're here today to discuss whether it's still whether it's okay or whether it's still taboo to talk about politics at the poker table. But that's not all we're going to discuss. We're also going to talk about things such as the social interactions of humans in general, how these things actually change at the poker table, how that relates, how social interactions relate to EV in live poker. And we'll talk a little bit about just emotions and humans in general and how they interact with each other, and maybe some other do's and don'ts for socializing at the table in order to, A, not be a moron, and B, maybe maximize EV in some ethical ways. So, live poker. How do you feel about live poker? Like, do you enjoy live poker more than online?
I think generally, yeah. It really depends on the day. Certainly, I think I can make more money playing live poker than I can online, especially in the US. But I do really like the social interactions and seeing a bunch of the same people every day and having ongoing relationships with them where it has a lot more camaraderie
Mm-hmm.
than sitting in my room playing online poker. You know?
Yeah, it kind of stokes like a very healthy fire that we need, I think, as humans. And if we're not doing that, like, we tend to go a bit insane. So, like, I've always found the grind very, very isolating, which is why I like teaching, basically, because you get to interact with people all day. Where are you on the spectrum? So if you imagined it, like, do you remember Phil Lack, the guy with the hoodie?
No, I don't know.
Do you remember, like, no, not Antonius. Do you remember Antonio Esfandiari?
Yes.
Right, so Phil Lack was like his buddy, and the two of them were like the most bubbly live players ever, right? They were all like, ha ha ha, like jokey, loosey goosey, like joking around all the time. D-Negs is a good example, right? So imagine those guys at the right hand side of the spectrum. They're like 100 on the scale of flamboyant socializing, and then you have, like, I don't know, like the biggest like rock pillar of a player in the world that sort of just sits there and doesn't say anything. Like Barry Greenstein or something like that. I don't know, someone like that. Where are you in that spectrum? How much are you like the life and soul table captain social guy, and or how much are you just like the guy that's there to grind?
Certainly somewhere in the middle, and I think it kind of oscillates throughout the day, where depending on who's at the table and who I want to be talking to, that there's days where I'm very busy and active, and then there's other days where I just kind of want some space, and I'll put headphones on and listen to a podcast or some music and kind of just grind through the rest of the day. In terms of win rate, I think being very social definitely helps your win rate. And it is something that I consciously try to work on.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Booger the Clown, real story, real guy, used to be a big fan of that. Booger the Clown was a guy called Booger who was a clown, and he used to basically be the life and soul. He was this little guy, like 5'2" or something like that, and he'd sort of jump about the table and be like, hey, where you got a 9 here, like blah, 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 like this, and like so animated all the time. And
Yeah.
and Booger was like very adamant that his win rate was like way, way, way higher. He actually hates being called Booger. Shout out to Boog the Clown, if you're listening, man. Hope all is well. But he used to do a lot of this, like, just bantering with the fish, really, like, you say you got a 9, no way you've got a 9. He's sitting there with like quad 9s, like, like giving it all this kind of stuff. And like, I always found that super difficult. I can get into that mode when I'm drunk, but I can only get into that mode when I'm in like a super social, friends around me, running good, like very much a fair weather socializer. And when things go badly, I just want to sit and be grumpy. So, like, how do you keep that as a live player? You know that's good for your win rate. There's fish at the table. They're drinking. You want them to have a good time. Do you, like, force yourself to do that a little bit, even when you're not feeling it? Or is it very much just, like, dependent on how bothered you can be that day to be sociable?
It's something that I consciously try to force myself to do, and I think it's kind of like a muscle that you work out, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, and then the longer you can do it, and kind of the more natural it becomes. Um,
That's interesting.
but yeah, I mean, I remember I went out to visit a friend in Arizona and played out at Talking Sticks there,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been there a few times, and there was a 2-5 grinder there who was, I mean, he's a good player, but what blew me away was how unbelievably social and positive he was. And he would walk into the room and everyone there would say hi to him, ask him how he's doing, and he had an ongoing dialogue with even the grumpiest non-social person there was always happy to see this guy walk in. And that made me think, oh my God, I need to be doing so much better at this than I currently do.
Yeah, wow. Is that like, are you introverted or extroverted in general then? Like, how would you describe yourself outside of poker, and how did that fit into that quest for you to become more sociable at the table?
I think I'm more introverted than extroverted. With people that I'm comfortable with, I am a lot more sociable, and so it takes some time for me to kind of gain a rapport with somebody, and then once I know, oh, here are the things I can talk about with this person, then I'm a lot more sociable with that person. But if I just sit down at a new table with 8 strangers, I have a hard time kind of coming out of my shell and interacting with them.
Interesting. How do you feel about the state of the games? I mean, let's go back to pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, like January, let's say December of last year. How is the live poker industry doing? And this will relate to how it does again when it comes back, I guess, and hopefully the next 6 months. Touch wood. But how do you feel the live industry is? Is it kind of dying the same? Maybe dying is too strong of a word, but is it suffering the same kind of terminal degradation that the online world is, with action drying up and people just being more worried about running into strong players and things like that? Or would you say it's still like as alive and well as it's always been?
I think that, I mean, live poker, certainly in New England, has been great for the last, I guess, 4 years that I've been playing around here. As I would travel around, certainly different areas have games of different quality, but I think that live poker is still doing great, still going strong. Certainly, it might be different in Europe versus the US, where it's harder to play online. It takes a bit more of an effort to get money onto a site, and it kind of self-selects for people who really want to play poker. Whereas, playing live, it's just you show up and you talk to a floor and then you sit down at a table.
Yeah. Here's a question, just as a live player, that you can answer maybe for anyone who's considering getting into live. So you're a live sort of 5-10 player. You've played live professionally. Fairly strong player. You know what you're doing. You're like well and truly a reg in every sense of the word. How would you advise someone who's thinking about taking up live poker for a living? Like, what kind of things would you say to them to make that sort of journey more successful and more efficient?
I think it kind of depends what baseline they're starting from. If they've never played any poker before, then I think the fastest way to improve would be to start for low stakes online, and just because of the sheer number of hands per hour you can get, and then having some software to track your stats to give you more of an idea of where you should be focusing on how you can improve. Is a lot easier to do that online than it is live.
Because it would take you a very long time, right? Like, to try and play anywhere near that amount of volume live, and then it would just delay your learning, I guess. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, it takes, I mean, live you might be getting 30, 35 hands an hour. Whereas online, you can obviously hit much more than that, 3, 4, 5, 600. And so, yeah, getting those repetitions in really helps reinforce some baseline concepts that all translate to playing live, but would take you much longer to learn those if you only play live.
How big a deal are live tells to your win rate? Like if someone said you can no longer see your opponents, just you can see like the bets that they've put in and you know who they are, but you can't see their hand movements, eyes, facial expressions, you can't hear what they're saying. How much would that put you off being a live grinder if you couldn't see them but they could see you? So in other words, I'm just trying to like quantify how much edge you think there is in that physicality.
So for me personally, and this was something that I was working on, or I just started working on right before lockdown happened. Me personally, I don't put that much weight into live tells. I feel like certainly there's the guy who wears his emotions on his sleeve, and you can tell when he misses his draw, and he just like rolls his eyes and gives you a okay, and he's already has the cards in his hand ready to fold. Outside of that guy, I find it very difficult to read somebody in terms of you can look at somebody and see they're nervous. And that might be very clear, but what you don't know is, are they nervous because they're bluffing, or are they nervous because they have the nuts and they want to get paid? And so because of that, I found it very difficult to really incorporate live tells. I know other players who adamantly disagree with me, and like I said, it was something that I had been working on before lockdown. But I think when I tell people that I play poker for a living, that's one of the first questions I get. Oh, so you're really good at reading people?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, well, it's a lot harder than you think, and I think it's certainly poker in movies and TV shows. That's what they make it all about. When at least in my reality, I think that you get much more information from watching somebody play previous hands than you do from looking at them trying to figure out, I don't know, the way he's holding his cards makes me think that he's weighted towards a bluff here.
Yeah. I've only been able to use live tells in a very specific context, and it's generally been either the guy that you talk about that wears his emotions on his sleeve. We all love that guy. Or maybe just like when I'm feeling really in the zone, I guess it just comes to me like intuitively. Like sometimes I just get like this feeling that this guy just doesn't have it. Like, but I couldn't tell you like what that's based on. Or I get this feeling that this guy is just like really strong here, like alarm bells go off in my head like as soon as he reaches for chips. And all of that, I'm not saying I'm great at it, and generally it can be inaccurate, but I feel like that, to me, is a lot more accurate than sitting and studying someone and like forcing myself to come up with a read based on things that they're doing. I almost feel like it's like this horrible rabbit hole where like the more you stare at somebody and try and figure out what's going on, the more you can end up deluding yourself into just like picking up on things that aren't actually indicative of anything. They're just noise. Yeah. And that kind of like puts me off, I guess, trying to make live reads on people altogether. So yeah, I think it's a weird thing. I don't know, man. I think like live reads for me is something that I would rather abstain from, because I feel like I'm more likely to invent things and delude myself and come up with excuses to do things than actually, get much out of that. Do you think that people overemphasize the importance of live tells to make up for like a deficiency in their game somewhere else because they don't have enough technical ability? Do you think that as you become more and more technically savvy, you actually put less and less energy into live reads?
That's an interesting question. Certainly I think a lot of recreational players put a lot of weight into live reads, and I agree that they're using that as kind of a substitute for a technical ability. I'm honestly not sure how much other pros at the table are weighting live reads. Certainly I'd like to think that I'm not doing anything super obvious of looking incredibly uncomfortable as I tank and call a turn bet, and then they're like, oh, I can just fire this river 100, and Jake's going to fold 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And maybe that is something I do and need to be more aware of.
So there's maybe a danger there that as you focus too much on the technical stuff, you don't have the same kind of inner policing of yourself and your own body language and things like that. Like, it might be possible to give off more as your guard slips because you're so focused on GTO and polarization and all of these concepts that you're trying to wrap your head around in that limited time frame.
Yeah, certainly I probably give away too much information with timing in terms of, as I do try to force myself to take some additional time when it's a very straightforward decision, but if I'm really struggling through a decision on the turn, I probably take way more. I mean, I definitely take way more time than when it's an easy, quick decision. And I would think that certainly gives some information away.
Yeah, I think we all are guilty of that at some point or other. Let's move on to what we were going to talk about today mainly, which is, like, I'm kind of, I guess, coming from like a philosophy background, I'm interested in, like, you know, probing you a bit on what you've experienced, like, at the live poker environment over the years, and like how people, how we react to like the whole, dilemma of like having to be social with people we don't know while also combating them in a very adversarial kind of game, while also placing our resources at stake. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, there's a lot of triggers here for fallouts, heightened emotions, fights, conflict. Have you witnessed a lot of conflict at the poker table, and what have been like the main causes of that, do you think?
What I tell a lot of my friends is, if you want to see grown men act like absolute children and throw temper tantrums, go to any poker room and like look around for 5 minutes and you'll see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the poker room is a weird place in that it's very different than normal society. I'm not sure there's a lot of other places where you constantly are being very competitive with people with a huge element of luck and losing a lot of money that has real value to you. And a lot of people, I think, don't handle it very well or graciously.
Yeah. But that's kind of innate, isn't it? Like, when our resources are threatened like that and they're taken from us by adversaries, we're probably not meant to handle it graciously. Like, that's probably not very selected for, I would imagine.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That it's it definitely goes against years of evolution. I feel like this is something you talked about in poker therapy.
Right.
That yeah, losing money is it feels very bad, and causes a lot of anger and frustration, and people lash out, and you could be mid-conversation with somebody and they lose a pot, and all of a sudden they snap at you, and, oh, you were distracting me in the hand, and
yeah,
and you just go, okay, I guess this conversation's on pause until you take a couple deep breaths, and then we can get back to it. Mm-hmm. Maybe, or maybe not.
Have you ever had a session of poker that's gone so badly, or someone's really rubbed you up the wrong way, that you've lost control of your normal social demeanor?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly guilty of that too. I've been, I mean, if I'm mid-conversation with somebody and I lose a huge pot, I might say, hey, give me a minute, I need to recollect myself. Yeah. Or if I lose a couple buy-ins in very quick succession, I may get up and go for a little walk, take a 10-minute break, or just go, all right, I think I'm done for the day. Today's not my day, and no matter how good I think I am playing, that, hey, I've lost 5 buy-ins, mm-hmm. and I'm probably not playing my A game no matter what I tell myself right now. Yeah. So just, we'll go home, we'll go exercise, and we'll come back tomorrow and give it another shot.
sounds like a great way to sort of limit volume when things are going badly, and then increase the volume when things are going well. Does that work on the other side of the coin when you're running really well and you feel like you're probably playing some of your best poker, A- game, A game, something like that? Do you extend sessions and capitalize on these times, or do you just cut your session at the time that you plan to?
I think it depends more on what the table looks like. If the table is incredibly profitable, I will do my best to extend as long as I can. If I'm running well, I guess I try not to incorporate like how well I'm running as much as do I think I'm playing well.
Yeah.
And if I'm playing well and the table conditions are good, then I will try to extend. That said, I know myself, and regardless of how the table is, that I kind of get tired after maybe 6 hours.
Yeah.
And unless the table is great, I generally would not extend a session for more than that, especially if I have something to do. If I have nothing to do, then I might stay a little longer. But
yeah, and EV's not all that matters, right? Like, people have this weird, it's one of my pet peeves in poker, actually. Sorry to interrupt you, I'll let you get back to that in just a sec, but I was just going to say, a lot of people are obsessed with this idea that, like, that's not maximum EV. And it's like as if we're just these greedy money hunting robots that just want to accumulate resources over and over again in the most cold, calculating way possible. Surely there has to be an element of, yes, it would be really high EV to stay here, but also I value my own like self-integrity and happiness, and I want to go watch this movie that I was planning on watching for my own mental health or something like that, right?
Yeah, certainly keeping your mental health as good as it can be is important. And for me, I find having a more, it's funny, I'm going to say I like having a more rigid schedule and knowing, okay, I'm going to be at the casino from noon to 7 or noon to 8, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I like that rigidity of a schedule. And at the same time, one of the reasons I very much enjoy playing professionally is I don't have a rigid schedule, and I can set it how I want it. And if I wake up and go, I'm really not feeling great today, I don't want to go to work, I don't have to.
Yep.
So it's kind of two sides of the coin.
Yeah. I think we need a balance between that. It took me a long time with, my job, which is mainly like coaching, producing content, training people. Took me a while to like figure out what the right level of like self policing is, and I've definitely gone through periods where I've forced myself to work when I don't feel like it, forced myself to take on tons of students even when I'm overflowing and really can't take any more on, and the result has been a big deterioration in mental and even to some extent like physical health, because it starts to affect your sleep and it starts to affect stress levels start to build, and it really can be like a vicious cycle. So we're not like a health and well-being podcast, we're not here to lecture people about the importance of self-care, but like seriously, in poker, I think self-care affects how much money you make. So when you're in the best condition possible, it actually affects your win rate, and therefore it affects your salary and your progress and your livelihood. And at the same time, it's also a sphere that gives you, like you said, the free reign to like actually promote your own mental health. Because if you're feeling bad one day physically, or you've had a terrible night's sleep, or you're feeling emotional about something that's gone in life, you don't then have to trudge into the office and deal with things that you would much rather not be doing. You can just say, okay, I regroup today and I make up for it when I'm feeling good and be more productive then. So it's a fantastic thing, but if you don't make use of that flexibility, it almost, I think I agree, it defeats a lot of the point of it. Cool. Let's move on to topics at the table, topics of conversation. What are some do's and don'ts for live poker? Like, what would happen to me if I went into a casino in New England and sat down and was like, yeah, that fucking Trump idiot, guys, what do you make of this? Like, clinging on to these last straws of what a joker, and I'd hit out with something like this just to paraphrase something somebody could say hypothetically. What would happen?
Yeah, I think people are generally respectful of other people's views.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the most part, people treat politics and and religion as just two things you're not supposed to talk about at the poker table. And I've never really tried to talk about religion, but I do talk a lot of politics.
Okay.
And
At the table as well, or just in general?
Oh, in general, but at the table as well.
Right.
I mean, for me, it started. So I started playing live, I guess, mostly in 2016, and so that was during the primaries up to the election. And in my day-to-day life, I interact with very few Republicans, and with the exception being of my extended family, who I see a couple times a year, and we've just collectively agreed we do not talk about politics ever, and then we'll be fine. And so I started my political discussion journey by saying, hey, you're an old, white, conservative man. Can I ask you some questions about your political beliefs? Because I don't ever get to ask these to anybody. And they were very receptive of that.
And this was at the poker table. This is like...
Yeah, this is at the poker table.
This is like an old man coffee Republican in a Make America Great Again hat.
100%. And I'd be like, tell me, what do you like about Trump? Why are you voting for him in the primary? What don't you like about Hillary? Just what do you think? How did you get to the views that you have? And at the beginning, I'd never really challenged them on anything. I would just ask kind of open-ended questions and let them talk and hear what they have to say. And it was really interesting and eye-opening to me. The more I did it, certainly the more I got comfortable interacting with these, because I'd see the same people over and over again. And the more I talked to them about it, the more I started to kind of push back on some things and say, okay, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And here's something that kind of contradicts what you're saying. And some people reacted very well, and some people did not. And for the people who, I mean, some people just don't want to have their views questioned. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the end of the discussion. And so the more I did it, the more I found the people that I could actually have a back and forth with. And so when I go into the casino every day, those are the people that I would look to talk to about whatever news just came out, to hear their take on it and know that I can push back and have a back and forth with them.
That's interesting. So guessing from what you're saying then that you're fairly, you were at least, and probably still are, I'm assuming, like fairly in the left-leaning camp as far as American politics goes, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having spoken to more people on the right, you know, the old man coffee and the red hat, and people like him, not to be like extremely offensive here, of course there are many other Republicans who aren't the old man coffee and the red hat, but let's put it this way, although there are many Republicans who aren't the OMC and the red hat, the OMC and the red hat is overwhelmingly likely to be Republican. Not always, but very likely to be. So that demographic of people that you spoke to, were there any issues, fiscal or social, that you actually began to, although you remained on the left in your overall position, were there any policies of the Democratic Party or any like issues that you formerly thought very strongly about, that you then actually started to change your mind and move more towards a center or right-wing view on? Or did you always, you know, with respect and curiosity, end up rejecting the conclusion of your conversation mate in these cases?
Yeah, I think I certainly moved to the right on, I mean, I don't want to say that I didn't move to the right on anything. I would start a lot of these conversations with, here are some things I think we can agree on, and kind of lay out some basic foundational work that, look, we both agree that we need to have a government. And we both agree that we need to have a military. And we both agree that we need to have taxes in order to pay for those things. And we both agree that the government wastes money, and that's unfortunate. And I wish that didn't happen. So we're not that far apart on a lot of things. And I feel like establishing that, I don't know, commonality, I think would take a lot of people by surprise, in that they go, okay, yeah, you know, he's right that we agree on all those things. And what we disagree on is maybe how much government waste is acceptable, or what level of taxation I'm comfortable with, or what programs that I want to pay for. And yeah, I'm trying to think of like a specific issue that I moved more to the right on.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, okay, I'll say that I think taxes should be lower for lower and middle income people. And I think lower taxes are generically a policy of conservatism. And the thing that we really disagree on is how high should taxes be on the very wealthy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And at what point we actually draw the line and start calling people very wealthy based on our relative tax bands and all of that stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. Without getting too heavily into like politics proper, to relate this to the card room, how did you find that atmosphere was conducive for discussing politics, compared with being in a bar with strangers, being at a party, being at a function, being in some other environment being in the workplace in which you might encounter acquaintances whom you don't know that well? Did you find that poker brought a sense of community or common ground that broke the ice and allowed you to make more progress than would be normally possible? Or did you find the opposite, that the adversarial / conflict inducive kind of game environment actually made people more touchy or more likely to take offense to something that you were probing at?
I think because the poker table is a group setting, that it makes it very difficult to have, I mean, you can't have a one-on-one conversation.
Right.
And I'd be sitting next to somebody who I'm friends with, we've played poker for years together. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and we would just talk about politics for 4 hours straight. And it's just between the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet some guy across the table who I don't know is just slowly getting more and more upset that we're talking politics at the poker table. And one of us is saying things that he doesn't like.
Well, that's the thing. Had you been agreeing with his position 100% with everything you were saying, I'm sure he would have taken no issue that you were talking about politics. It's usually not the topic itself, but it's a way that his own ego is feeling threatened by something that's causing that. So I agree. So how do you then tread that water and like manage that boundary between wanting to talk to your closer acquaintances while not upsetting some random guy across the table who takes issue with a few of your stances?
It kind of depends on who that other guy is. Like, if it's a guy that I've never seen before, then I don't really care that he gets upset and leaves, unless he's just aggressively donating to the table. Then I'm not too concerned with this one random person's emotions who I'm never going to see again. Yep. And if he wants to jump into the conversation, be my guest. And I'm happy to engage him and talk about like what he disagrees with what I'm saying. But
yeah, it's almost like if you're on a train or a bus and you were having this conversation with your buddy and the guy behind you turned around and was like, hey man, that's fucking offensive. Like, that would be uncalled for. Like, you're having a private conversation.
Yeah.
Poker puts people in close proximity, much like a train or bus puts people in close proximity, in my opinion. But does it force you to respect, it's not like you're actually out to dinner with someone, you've not actually, have you really consented tacitly or overtly to the same level of respect that you'd be, you know, maybe socially bound to in like a group setting, like a meal with friends and friends of friends? Or are you just playing cards but with the same social expectations as being in someone's proximity on public transport?
I think it kind of depends on where you're sitting at the table. If I'm at the corner of the table and I'm talking to the guy next to me, then I kind of feel like there is an expectation that, hey, we're just having a conversation between the two of us. If someone else wants to jump in, fine. But if you don't like what we're saying, leave us alone and we're not bothering you.
Yep.
But if I'm talking to the guy across the table from me, then it kind of monopolizes all the...
Right.
It monopolizes the ability of anyone else at the table to have a conversation.
It depends what you're saying as well, right? Like how civilly are you saying it? If you're like, Trump's an asshole, why would you ever like that guy? That's very different to being like, yeah, it's very questionable how he's handled this election defeat. You know, like these are two separate ways of being. And like knowing you, I've no doubt that you would very much be the latter, right? You'd be like treating people with like a fair amount of respect and not being like that. So yeah, that's an interesting point though about the geography of the table and where you're at. Do you feel like you break rules, like social conventions, when you have these political discussions, or do you feel like it's you're trying to be progressive, like you're trying to get people to see that we should be able to talk about these things as a healthy functioning democracy? We should be able to convene with one another and discuss before we vote, discuss before we make snap judgments. Is it like that, or do you just do it because you're interested in like a social experiment as to like what's going to happen? Or maybe there's elements of both, I don't know.
Oh, I definitely do it because I'm interested in it and it's what I want to talk about.
Right.
I'm not a huge American sports fan. I love watching English soccer, but there aren't that many guys who want to talk about that with me.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about politics because I don't care about basketball or football or baseball. And it's new every day. I mean, I see these same people every day.
Yeah.
So we run out of things to talk about. Like, I can only ask, how's your family so many times before it's like, I know how your family's doing. You told me yesterday.
Yeah.
And so there's a big piece that it's just, that's what I'm interested in and want to talk about.
Yeah.
I do think that the taboo of let's not talk about politics really contributes to people's inability to talk about politics without getting emotional.
And polarization in general, right, in the country.
Yeah, and I truly believe the more you talk about it, the more people understand each other. And that's why I try to start it with, look, we have a lot in common, regardless of the fact that we vote very differently. Mm-hmm. We agree on a lot of things. And like, I am not the lunatic socialist that Fox News would have you believe. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'd like to think that's helped. Certainly some people understand my views better.
Yeah.
What, at the same time, I will say that I don't think I've changed anyone's mind who I've been talking to directly. Like,
you never know.
I don't think...
A lot of people are proud, you know, even if you had, they may not let on immediately. Stuff takes a while to sink in. You might have. Yeah,
that is true. What I do think I have affected is the guy who's sitting at the table, not participating in the conversation, mm-hmm. who isn't political, but maybe he grew up in a house that only watched Fox News. And now he hears me, I hope, sounding somewhat reasonable, pushing back against a more conservative policy. Yep. And he might think, okay, maybe that's not that crazy. Maybe those democratic, liberal, socialist, communists are, I kind of like the idea of universal healthcare. That sounds pretty good to me. I didn't know that other countries liked their universal healthcare. Mm-hmm. Because I've always been told that they don't, and it's terrible, and people die in hospitals and have to, can't choose their doctor and have to wait months for a life-saving procedure, and that's what I've heard, so it must be bad. Mm-hmm. But then we get to a poker table and I'm talking about universal health care, and the Republican says, "Oh, it's terrible," and I go, and he goes, "Oh, all these other people from other countries come to America to get their health care because their stuff is so much worse."
Mm-hmm.
And I go, "All right, well, we have a very international table here, so why don't we take a little poll?"
Mm-hmm.
And I go, "Hey, you're from England. Do you like your nationalized health care?" "Oh, yeah, I love it." "Hey, you're from Sweden. Do you like it?" "Oh, yeah, I love it." "Oh, you're from Poland. Do you have universal health care?" And he goes, "Of course."
Yeah. Yeah.
"Do you like it?" "Oh, yeah, it's great." "Would any of you guys prefer the U.S. model of healthcare?" "Oh, definitely not. It looks terrible to us."
Yeah.
And so I'd like to think I changed somebody's mind who was not participating in the conversation, but was now exposed to some more left-wing ideas that he hadn't been exposed to before.
Because there's so many people who grew up, right, brainwashed by their parents or their friends or their culture or, their family or whatever. This happens in religion, which in my mind is very destructive. It happens in politics, which is possibly less irreparable, but still very damaging. And these people don't actually have free will. There's the philosophical debate about what is free will and does anyone really have it and blah, blah, blah. But even if we go beyond that causal idea that we're never really responsible for our choices if they're all biologically chosen by atoms and things that we don't control, even if we move beyond that and start talking about free will in the sense of what we believe free will is to what we believe or what thoughts we apprehend as good or proper or right, there's so many people who just grow up thinking that one thing is bad and one thing is good, and that brainwashing, because that's what it is, right? This is brainwashing. People's parents brainwash them, grandparents brainwash them. My school forced us to sing hymns and praise the Lord every Tuesday morning and every Friday morning for hours, 4 hours of our week. So I remember having this dichotomy in my head of this is absurd, this is completely nonsense, but it must be true because the whole school is doing it. It's crazy. But back to politics, I think that's a great thing that you're doing. You're actually inadvertently getting people to reconsider this sort of brainwashed childhood that's dictated their starting adult views, but those don't have to be their final views. You never talk about religion at the poker table, right? Do you consider that religion is still off limits? Are people too emotional about religion? Should people have this right that they... I don't want to go too far with this podcast or upset anyone who's watching, but should that be a thing? Is that a protected status? Should we be immune from having to discuss our religious faith? It's just this thing that exists and you don't get to question it and we don't have to discuss it. So I guess my question to you here is, why would you not discuss religion at the table? Is it just because you don't have any interest, or is it because of the more taboo thing? And what do you think we're going to move towards with that? Where should we go with religion, in the common forum, public forum, because poker's a public place? Should we feel we aren't able to discuss it, or should it, in your opinion, be okay to just turn around and say, hey man, what are your religious beliefs? Why do you think that?
Oh man, that is a loaded question.
Avoid the traps now, Jake. I've just set you 16 of them.
Yeah, I'm just going to step in one after another. There is no God, and I'm not sure if religion should be a protected class. I mean, in America it is. I'm not sure what it's like in other places. In terms of not talking about it, I guess I feel like religious views are much more immutable and unchangeable than political views, and personally, I'm less interested in religion, so I'm not going to bother bringing it up. I've never seen a productive religious conversation at the poker table.
Yep. I don't think you will.
I've certainly seen productive political conversations at the poker table. And just because that's something that I enjoy,
yeah,
that's what I'm going to end up participating in.
So perhaps it's actually futile to discuss religion. Not only does it have this downside of upsetting people who have strong beliefs one way or the other, but it also has this even more kind of pointless aspect to it, that even if you do make valid logical points, you're not really in the domain of logic anymore, right? You're out with that. You're in some domain of faith or some domain of personal belief or something else, right? So if I'm trying to convince a religious person that there is no God, I've already kind of, what I've said to them is already so abhorrent that it's broken down all communication before we can even get off the ground. Like it's very unproductive. So I can see that being the case. It does sadden me that like at the poker table we can't discuss these things, but I'm living in an ideal world here if I say we should all just be able to like calmly and peacefully discuss our religious views. I think one day we'll probably be able to do that better, because I do think that one day I think religion will be less of a thing, and the people who play poker are generally less religious than people who would attend, I don't know, some other kind of a crafts fair at the village hall, right? For example, those are two very different domains, and I think that poker players getting younger and more geeky and technical and, I don't dare I say it, like, I don't know, nerds basically, like, as we move towards that gaming culture of poker, I think we'll move away from anyone wanting to discuss religion anyway in years to come. But I think I think the poker table is a great forum for discussing politics. I think you've convinced me today that we should be able to discuss politics at the table. I really like the way that you do it. I like the way that you're progressive with it and respectful. And I think that's the way to go about things. And I also like your beliefs that if someone is offended by a conversation that's happening at the other end of the table, then that's the same as them being offended on a bus or something, and they should just butt out and do their own thing. That's been a really interesting discussion. I do have a student right now, so I'm going to have to wrap this up, although I'd love to ask you some more things. But when COVID goes away and live poker comes back, keep fighting the good fight. Keep people talking about the issues that actually matter to us as a society, because like, my belief would be, what is a democracy if its civilians are completely divided and full of hate for one another? Like, how can we possibly reach the right conclusions or decisions when we're in that mode? And it sounds like you're doing quite a bit of good there, while also having a job that many people would argue takes and pillages and doesn't give much back. It sounds like, although you're satisfying your own curiosity, you're probably giving something back as well.
I think that is a very generous way to put it, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, you could be doing it in a much worse argumentative way that would ruffle more feathers. You seem to be at least going about it in a respectful way. So
yeah, I certainly try to be respectful of other people's views, but do like to push a little bit and just kind of see what the boundaries are,
Absolutely. It's an interesting thing. I think you've convinced me that next time I'm in London playing live, I'm just going to be like, so let's talk about this. Probably a couple of whiskeys in though, Anyway,
it definitely helps.
Jake, thank you so much for coming on, man. I'll get you back on in the future. We'll talk about more things. I wish you all the best with your return to live poker when it happens. And yeah, man, it's been a fun conversation for sure. Guys, check out carrotcorner.com/carrot poker trainer, I think it's called. We have a pre-flop, or carrot pre-flop trainer. We have a pre-flop trainer coming out. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a way to drill GTO game theory pre-flop. Have a look at it. And we are going to get back with the regular rolling podcast. I'll have more students and guests and friends on soon. This has been Pete Clark, and I'll see you guys very shortly for the next episode.